want to see Democrats do, in Washington? How do you want to see them moving forward? Do you want to see them, as one of my guests from MoveOn.org the other day said, be the resistance, from basically do what Republicans were accused of doing to then President Obama when he first came into office, be obstructionist every step of the way? Or do you want to see Democrats find common ground on areas of agreement?
Well, look, I think where there are areas of common ground, I think that is the way that our party is. If we can find common ground, I'll go back to when President Bush was in office and Ted Kennedy worked with him on No Child Left Behind. If there are areas, and you can, regardless of how you feel about the legislation, my point is, if there are places where we can work together, where Democrats can work with this administration, I think that is and can do good for the American people. Absolutely.
But politically, there are Democrats who say, look, no, obstruction is the way to go, because frankly, any cooperation, it works in the benefit of the party of the president that's in power.
Yeah. Well, look, again, I think the test is going to have to be, does it deliver real results for people? Is it going to help make sure? Look, Donald Trump promised to create all kinds of great jobs all throughout this country. I want to see him be able to do that instead of continue to race bait and, again, manipulate people's economic emotions and blame other people. Go ahead and let's see you create those jobs. I think that's what we want to see. But if I could just say one other thing, Anderson, I think it's also important that the media has a very important role to play in this as well, in holding Donald Trump accountable. Because the other thing is, he is someone who trafficked in lies in an unprecedented manner. And that, in combination with the fake news, in combination with the alt-right and their ability, which we've seen in the campaign, which they were happy to talk about a bit yesterday, their ability to drive these lies and fake messages, I think we all have a responsibility to hold this president accountable to the things that he says he's going to do.
It sounds like, though, you are saying that Hillary Clinton was essentially sort of victimized by all these other forces. What about mistakes that your campaign made, that she made as a candidate? Isn't there an argument to be made that she just wasn't the right candidate for the time? She just wasn't a candidate that resonated the way that Donald Trump did? People wanted change, and they viewed Donald Trump as an agent of that change.
Well, sure, and that's something we talked about at length yesterday. Robbie Mook, our campaign manager, and Mandy Grunwald and myself and a number of us were made very plain that, absolutely.
But you seem to be blaming Comey, the Comey letter, all these external factors.
Well, but here's actually what we were saying, Anderson, is that, look, given how close this election was in so many, look, there's 3 key states, it's about 100,000 votes. There are any number of things that we could, talk about. Jen talked about, should we have done another debate closer to Election Day? Should we have sent her to Wisconsin? There are, anybody who has theories about those things, they're probably right? The point is, there are other dynamics that we thought were important to talk about, not just because they were at play during the election, but because they have consequences for who we are as a culture now and for our politics now. I don't think we want to be a country with a politics of hate. And when we talked about the Comey letter, the point that we were making there was we saw real momentum in the numbers. And I can tell you, I was on the ground with Tim Kaine in a number of states before that Comey letter came out, and in some of those same places after the letter. And there was a real feeling, and the data that we had showed a tightening of the numbers that suggested that the Comey letter did have an impact in terms of our momentum.
Okay.
And Corey Lewandowski and others from the Trump campaign admitted that as well. One of the other factors that we talked about was, look, I think there was also an assumption, frankly, towards the end, and so much of the coverage suggested that Hillary was going to win, that I think that may have suppressed some of our votes. So there were a number of other things that we talked about. This was, obviously these are tough issues when we talk about race in this country, and when we talk about things like the alt-right, and when we talk about, bigotry and bias. But I think there are tough conversations we just have got to have.
Let me ask you finally just about the recount effort initially launched by Jill Stein, since essentially joined by the Clinton campaign. Even Jill Stein acknowledges she has no evidence of hacking or voter fraud. Do you agree with it? And do you think there should be these recounts? I mean, she's raising millions of dollars. I assume building a mailing list for future use. Does this make sense?
So I'm sure you saw the statement that Mark Elias, our attorney, put out. I mean, our position on this has been very clear. When Hillary, very graciously called Donald Trump the night of the election and conceded. And, our folks in the weeks since have done our own due diligence and research. They've had conference calls with some of the outside folks who have, suggested that there may have been problems. And at the end of the day, made the determination that we didn't think a recount was the right way to go.
Right.
However,
that letter, in fact, said
Jill's,
after doing all that due diligence, you found no evidence of demonstrable,
right.
demonstrable evidence of a voter fraud.
However, the dynamic shifted once Jill Stein, as was her right as a candidate who was on the ballot, then moved forward in her recount efforts beyond raising money. Actually got a recount started, for example, in Wisconsin. And at that point, the decision we had to make was, is it appropriate for us to be at the table to make sure, A, that the process is fair, that all sides are represented, and that we, again, have a seat at the table from a legal standpoint. And we thought that was an important thing to do, more as not because there's an expectation it's going to change the outcome, but because, now that this process has been initiated, we think it's important that we're there at the table as part of the process to ensure fairness.
All right. Karen Finney, I appreciate your time. Thanks, Karen.
You bet. Thanks, Anderson.
Pistol. I ain't turning down nothing but my cow. Want that truth? Out. I'm trying to give it to the world before it burn up. I only know one way. Turn up.